Hello, hello, and welcome again to a Beatles program that we call Things We Said Today. This is a talk show in which we talk about anything that has to do with the Beatles. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the 4 regular co-hosts of the show, and some of you might know me for another Beatles show that I host called Every Little Thing. Being joined by my regulars, Steve Marinucci, who writes for Beatles Examiner. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
We also have Al Sussman, one of the writers for Beatle Fan magazine. He's been with them since the very beginning of Beatle Fan. Hi, Al.
Hi, Ken. Hello there, everybody.
And we've also got Allan, who not only writes for Beatle Fan, but a whole bunch of different publications as a freelance writer. He's a big music critic for these many years, and we welcome Allan to the show. Hi, Allan.
Hey, Ken. Hello, everyone.
And we've got a special guest with us who's joined us to celebrate a brand new album from a band that he is in. He is Glen Burtnik, and he's had a very long career in the music industry. I remember him back in the 80s when he was putting out solo music, and for many years he was in the band Styx. He replaced Tommy Shaw for a few years. And he's written with a whole bunch of great people in the music industry, and if you go to the Fest for Beatle fans, if you've been a regular, he's been the bass player. He's been the Paul guy in their house band Liverpool. And he's here to join us to talk about this new band of his called the Weeklings. We welcome Glen Burtnik to Things We Said Today.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're here to talk about this new CD, this new album of yours, and to mix that with all kinds of conversation about the Beatles. But for those of our listeners that don't know about this band called the Weeklings, there is a new CD out. It's a self-titled album called The Weeklings. It's made up of 12 tracks. Half of them are original songs, and half of them are songs that the Beatles either gave away to other artists or songs that they recorded themselves but didn't release when they were together, that ended up on the Beatles anthology. And the 6 original songs are done in the style of early Beatles. They're songs that musically will remind you of the early years of the Beatles, melodically, harmonies, instrumentation, and it's really a wonderful CD, and I'm really enjoying it. I've been listening to it for the past couple of weeks, and first of all, we want to ask Glen the very basic question: what gave you the idea to put together this band, and also to have an album that was half originals and half songs that the Beatles gave to others or didn't release themselves?
Well, it was an evolution, and it was never a plan, and it just kind of fell together slowly. I do a show, a big production in a theater in New Jersey every year called the Beatles Bash, and we cover a number of Beatle records once a year. And about a year or two ago was the 50th anniversary of the first 2 Beatle albums. So we did. Half of that show was those 2 albums. So instead of me employing the usual orchestra, choir, and harp and all the other instruments that you get into in later Beatle work, the first half of the concert we focused on these 2 early albums, which, for all intent and purposes, really is arranged for 4 people. There's just 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and 3 vocalists most of the time. So during that process, the 3 guys that I played with in this show, we looked at each other and said, this is fun. It was so much more fun now just doing those 4 instruments instead of the big production, the big arrangement. And so then somebody in the group got a call for, they needed a band to do a gig at a library of all places. So we got to play, make noise in a library. And we didn't even have a name, but the audience reacted very favorably. We had a blast. And this 4 particular group of fellas, we all just, we kind of fell into, well, maybe we should be a group. So we came up with a name, started to play, and then one of the guys, Bob Berger, who's my main collaborator in the group, said, we should make an album because when groups play, they sell merch. This is what we do nowadays. And I thought it was the stupidest idea that I'd ever heard of. You know, I know that there are Beatle tribute acts who record Beatles songs, who re-record Beatles songs, and they try to make it sound as close to the Beatles as possible. And my philosophy on it is that you just sit there when you listen to somebody doing that, and you feel like, well, you're constantly just comparing it, and it's always going to fall short, because who's better to sing, you know, All My Lovin' than Paul McCartney, you know? And it's just, all those songs were done perfect, and that's why we love this music so much. But I said, okay, we'll sell some merch. So then we went into the studio, and Marty Scott got wind of this. Here's a modern story. On Facebook, he heard about me working on this record, and he contacted me, and he said, I want to put out your record. So that started more wheels turning, and we said, you know, let's not try to retread greatest hits of the early Beatles quartet. Let's not do Twist and Shout and All My Lovin' and whatever. Let's find some songs that aren't as familiar to people. It's still a quartet, and it's still early music. So we started to work on that, and then it dawned on Bob and I are both successful songwriters. We've written songs for a number of different artists. And so, you know, along the way we said, well, okay, how about we add some of our own songs? And on top of that, then we got into the technology, and we created this monophonic record, and we set up very much like the Beatles originally did. You know, there's diagrams and stuff of how they set up in the studio. And for the first time in my recording career, I was singing lead vocals a few feet away from the drummer while he was playing live. Instead of us fixing music and fixing the parts and editing, and we did everything pretty live with very, very little some overdubs, the way the Beatles did, a second guitar, double the voice. But it was a real experiment for me. I'd never done anything like that. And as long as I've been a recording artist, we fix everything. A lot of digital editing goes on in the world today. But we came up with this record where we used old microphones, we used old guitars, old amplifiers, old signal processing, and it came out in mono. And I might add, it's coming out as a vinyl LP in April, which is what I'm ecstatic about, because that's my favorite way to listen to music. But how's that for a short answer?
That's a good answer.
Glenn, there's one aspect that you didn't mention. Marty was involved with Gem Records.
Yes.
Which the older listeners will remember. I'm not sure the younger ones know what that refers to, but Gem Records was a big importer of British albums way back in the 70s, and you know, if you went into a record store, it was very likely that you would find Gem Records stickers all over Beatle albums, from, you know, Parlophone Beatle albums and other British albums and other imports, because that's who did the bulk of the importing back then. And that's an interesting little connection there between you and between your project and him, is that, you know, this whole British aspect, this import aspect of the whole thing. How did that play into the whole thing at all, or was it just the music itself that is the connection?
Well, like I said, he reached out to me. I wasn't looking for a record deal. You know, we're all still kind of shocked by the whole thing, but I did know Gem Records, and I do have a bunch of Gem imports from the the early 70s, I guess it was, and and there was a lot of fusion, a lot of power pop and stuff from Europe at that time, and Prague, a lot of Prague too, but Yeah, so I kind of knew Marty that way, but I don't know if it played into it or not. Like I said, the whole thing was like kind of accidental.
Hmm.
It's so funny. It's ironic too because I've spent years trying to get record deals. Before got my first A&M solo deal together, I spent years, looking for, begging for an album deal with a record label, and then I've been through a few, but I kind of gave up on it by this point. I'm like, I'll be 60 next month, and so I've been around the block, and I did not expect, to be approached by any record companies or anything like that. And along came Marty with Jem, and I kind of like it that he's an old school record guy himself.
Right.
That does play into it. His enthusiasm is what got us to go for it, because here's this old school record guy, and he's all about the record business, which is an odd business to be into in 2015, but he has some old feelings about how things are promoted and how you get the word out and stuff like that. And that, I think that suits this project because, like I said, we're very into old technology and old songwriting techniques as well, so it's kind of fun. It's a very fun project.
Okay.
Glenn, the originals on the album, the 6 originals, are you mentioned that you and Bob had decided to include some originals. Were they new songs, or were they things that you had written in recent times?
2 or 3 of them we had, and we happened to have written together. There was one song that's about 20 years old that I never recorded. I always wanted to, and it was definitely a Beatle-inspired type song, which I wasn't trying to hide. As a songwriter, I think a lot of pop songwriters in the past 50 years have tried to conceal Beatle influence, try to use them without it being too much of a lift, But but this one was kind of an exercise in, gee, I'd like to write a Beatles song. But then there's
which one was that?
That's Breathing Underwater.
Okay.
And what's funny about that one is that I demoed it. I had a really good version of it and stuff like that. And then I showed it to Bob when we were getting ready to record, and he said, who wrote this? And I was like, Bob, you and I wrote this. He had forgotten, But then there were 3 or 4 new ones, and again, we were very dedicated to this idea of writing and arranging for a quartet, and that really is the one of the impetuses of this whole thing. Was the arrangement on those first 2 Beatle albums is wonderful, and it's only a quartet. There's not even much overdubbing by George Martin and stuff. I mean, it's like it really is close to their cavern as close to their cavern days as you can get in the studio from them, and there is an excitement that comes with that. So when we were writing for that, there was a bit of that, and we wanted it to be energetic and exciting because those early Beatle albums are just that. Now they're younger men, these are guys in their 20s that made those 2 albums, and these songs that we got that weren't originals, that we kind of dug up these demos of theirs. For the most part, they're pretty they're like from young innocent writers. They weren't the guys yet who wrote Eleanor Rigby and I Am the Walrus. They still had their foot in late 50s pop and stuff, R&B. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of looking at that when we wrote these new songs of our own. We wanted it to all kind of fit together. So there was the arrangement to consider, and then there was the subject matter and the energy, and so that was a really fun part of the project, is writing Mona Lisa and Little Tease, because it was like, no, we need a Hold Me Tight, I remember saying that. We need to hold me tight on this. And then, we need I saw her standing there. We got to have another. I saw her standing there on this record. And so we sat down to write it. And unashamedly, that was the other thing. Like I was saying earlier, when you're a songwriter, a pop songwriter, especially for me, because I've written songs for a million other artists.
Sure.
I've always kind of tried to hide the Beatle thing. I want it to be lurking underneath, but I never wanted it to be blatant. Whereas in this project, Bob and I looked at each other and said, let's just let it out. This is the music we grew up to. This is the music that probably made us into wanna-be musicians. This is the soundtrack of our lives kind of music. And we know it so well. I mean, personally, I was in Beatlemania in 1978, and since it's been, I've always done a lot of Beatle performing, a lot of Beatle music. So we know this music very, very well. Everybody in the band does, and it was, it was really fun to kind of unashamedly try to write a Lennon and McCartney-esque song, or 6.
Is it also kind of daunting? I mean, you know the stuff well. You've played the Lennon McCartney catalog for some time, but it must also be sort of daunting, even if we're talking about something like "Hold Me Tight" as opposed to "I'm the Walrus," to sit down and say, I want to write something with this kind of spirit, and knowing that it's got to have the sort of hallmarks and energy of a Beatles song.
I don't know. Daunting's not the right word. We enjoyed the process a lot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was a freedom in it. Instead of trying to be clever, which a lot of songwriting has kind of become, like there's so much competition and all of that, and the modern world is a lot more ironic and clever, than things were in the late 50s and early 60s when these guys came up with those songs. But there's an innocence there. So we didn't have to make any grand statements about, we didn't have to write Imagine There's No Heaven. We didn't have to write Goo Goo Kachoo. We didn't have to, break down any artistic barriers. We just got to draw from this fabulous positivity, this well of energy that these young, brilliant musicians spewed.
Okay. Now that you've done this project and the album, and you were talking about the formation of the group as being almost not quite by happenstance, but a bit. Do you see it now as a going concern, and more albums forthcoming?
Yeah, if it's this much fun, I don't see why not. Like we've been playing a lot now, and it gives us a license to, perform here and there. And it's fun having a new record out, and it's getting played on satellite and terrestrial radio stations a bit, and it's just exciting. And like I said, I mean, to have a vinyl record coming out is, that's a real gas.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn, the 6 songs that you covered, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but you tried to stick to the songs that were, for the most part, less familiar. I mean, the hardcore Beatle fans are going to know them anyway. But you didn't go into, say, A World Without Love or Bad to Me. Did you do that intentionally because those were so well known? Did you really want to keep it the lesser-known material?
Not really. We went for the stuff that we thought we could do justice to, that would be fun to record and fun to listen to. Yeah, I mean, World Without Love would possibly be more commercial or better known, but that, this entire project has been a surprise, and the fact that I'm even talking to you guys about it is kind of a trip. So the idea of choosing the songs for the audience, it was as much just, how can we have the most fun on this, and how can we make the coolest the record that we want to make. And you do have that in the Beatle fan world. of which that's a huge, demographic. The everybody knows these songs and worships them. We belong to a cult, you realize, a religion practically, so people who do know these songs, it's a bit of a twist. First of all, we did rearrange these songs. Some of them are very different than the way that the Beatles demos were. But, there's no shortage of Beatles tribute acts in the world and bands that work very, very hard. And I've done this a lot myself to try to emulate every sound, to try to recreate every mix of every album live. There's just tons of that out there. But, we've fallen into this little niche and other people have done this. Other people have re-recorded Beatle demos, but we're adding this original side to it. So it's kind of a vanity project that's, on acid. I guess.
Glenn, you brought up a point about rearranging the songs. The one that really hit me hard was "If You Got Trouble," which is a horrible song the way they did it, and you guys actually made it sound good. I was sitting there listening to it and go, God, I actually like the song. This is great. What did you? Was there something specific you did with that particular song, or was it just a kind of a you did all the same things with all of them, or? But that one really sounded good. You really did a good job with that one.
Well, thanks. I just want to say, under no circumstances will I ever be quoted as having said any song by Lennon and McCartney was horrible. But that you said that, not me. But let's put it this way: it's not one of their finer songwriting moments. No. And but what really happened was one funny thing about the Weeklings, which is a guy named John Murjavi. John plays lead guitar. Bob Berger, who plays rhythm guitar, harmonica, and Dave Anthony played the drums. And myself. One interesting thing is that we are kind of Beatle-esque characters. The drummer is kind of the guy that doesn't really get into the creative thinking as much, but does contribute a groove. The lead guitarist, he sings an occasional song, but he's not the main guy. But boy, is he great with the harmonies and guitar parts. Bob sings and writes, and I sing and write. And Bob might be a little edgier, and I might be a little more melodic. I'm not sure about that, but I happen to be left-handed, so I got that. But in any case, we do have, we're slightly Beatle-esque, personality-wise. So, that kind of, so what that meant was we needed a Ringo song. And If You Got Troubles was, we were looking at the choices for what song would our Ringo sing. And, If You Got Trouble was one of them. And we all realized that it's not the Beatles' favorite song of their own either. Thus, they never put it on a record until Anthology. But we looked at it and said, well, maybe we can make something out of this, And so we polished it up a little bit and added a little, some elements of some later Beatles, and kind of served it up on a platter that way.
Yeah, you did a really good job with that one.
Well, let's take a couple of other covers there, and One and One is Two, and It's for You. You kind of subtly changed the approach of the original records.
Yes.
Of those two. One and One is Two is almost slowed down to kind of like a shuffle beat. And It's for You is much more spare than the Cilla Black record.
Right. I really love the Cilla Black record. I'm a fan of Cilla Black's. So I felt very strongly that I thought the record could use one of those dark John Lennon, "There's a Place" kind of songs, haunting. And so we added "It's for You," and we said, well, instead of making it sound like a Burt Bacharach song, let's try to get closer to John Lennon with an acoustic guitar, and it kind of led us to do the song that way, as opposed to, I think that it sounded to me like what Cilla Black was trying to do was a Burt Bacharach, Hal David kind of thing. But and One and One, the arrangement, we wanted to make it we wanted to make it a little updated and more interesting. It sounded to me like they didn't really finish that song because they didn't have a bridge, a middle eight as they would call it. It's just like two verses, and it goes around a couple of times. That was a song that was recorded by, was it the Foremost?
Mike Shannon and I forget the name of the group. The Strangers, yes.
Yeah, that's right. And but even that kind of left us thinking, we could beef this up a little bit. We can add a little petrol, and and so we took some arrangement chances, but it's a really fun song, and I think we pumped some energy into it. I should probably point out that my girlfriend really does not like the lyrics. She thinks it's kind of juvenile, but I think that's part of the charm of the record.
The funny thing is that one of the very early Beatles books, a book called Love Me Do by a fellow named Michael Braun, who toured with the Beatles in the fall of '63 and in Paris and the U.S. in early '64, he actually, in one of the chapters, he describes John and Paul writing it in the suite they were in Paris.
Wow!
And and it does, from his description, it sounded like it was very much incomplete.
Yeah. Well, they were incredibly prolific in that era. They were writing songs in hotels and buses and everything else.
Exactly.
And their output was amazing. And so it's completely possible that they got to a certain point with a song like that and looked around and said, "Do we love it? No. Do we want it for ourselves? No."
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good enough as it is. Let's give it to somebody else.
Exactly.
There's a huge difference, I think, between writing a song that the band rejects and just gives to someone else than writing a song specifically for someone. So, I just wanted to say, Glenn, one of the aspects of the Beatles' careers that I find even more fascinating than before are the songs that they wrote for other people. And that's also in their solo careers. As I study them more, especially with "It's for You," you were bringing up Burt Bacharach and Hal David. That song always, to me, has had more of a theatrical kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
I can even hear like Shirley Bassey singing it, someone like that. Yeah. But as far as the composition is concerned, it seems a lot more complicated for its time, or certainly what pop groups were writing, than the other pop music that Lennon and McCartney were writing at the time.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, there are haunting songs like "I'll Be Back" and "There's a Place," or those songs that just kind of strike me as haunting, and they're in minor keys, like "It's for You." It's just they're a little darker. They're probably more Lennon than Paul, and just kind of there is that flavor that they had, but in that case they wrote that for Cilla. It seems like they definitely wrote it for her. Yeah, great stuff though. I love that side of their work for sure.
Right. Well, the Cilla Black stuff was more Paul's.
Well, that's true.
His compositions.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Although "It's for You," I wonder. Yeah, that might have been the two of them, unless you guys know differently.
I've always wondered about that, because you've probably heard that little promo record that they sent out, in which on one side John introduces "It's for You," Paul introduces Peter and Gordon's "I Don't Want to See You Again," which we know Paul wrote. So I've always wondered if maybe John wrote more of "It's for You."
It sounds like John to me.
Yeah, exactly.
But the chord changes are a little more ambitious, so that makes it, that's a vote for Paul there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think melodically it's more Paul to me.
Could be.
I just hear it as,
I mean,
Uh,
you raise a good point about songs they wrote for others. I know that like Panina, for instance, which isn't on this record, we haven't recorded it yet, but I do love that song. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I don't even know that Paul was writing that for somebody else. But there's things like that are just surprising and different, that dramatic, that they could write they could write, as well as being, the little boy band of the 60s.
yeah. Well, beyond It's For You, when he wrote Step Inside Love,
Yeah,
which I really like. I mean, that has a real jazz feel to it.
great.
Maybe he felt that it was something that the Beatles couldn't people wouldn't accept as a Beatles song. So we can stretch a little bit more creatively when he's writing for someone else. Maybe.
I guess so.
It's just
Early on, I think they were self-conscious that way. But by the time they got to the White Album, all bets were off. They were so experimental musically that, it was a waterfall, of music.
Glenn, I was going to switch subjects and ask you about Liverpool, since you've been with Liverpool. You guys are always playing with some great people. Anybody stick out, in the time that you played with them? Any really interesting performances or stories?
Well, being kind of a Beatle history fan, to perform with Klaus Voormann is huge to me. And then the other thing that comes to mind is Norman Smith, to have played, "Oh Babe, What Would You Say," while Hurricane Smith himself was thinking, in his 90s, I might add.
Oh my God!
To his wife of all, like, for 60 years or something insane. It was the sweetest and most amazing moment of your life when you realize, here's the guy that he captured some of my favorite records ever, and he was it was like, so, and thinking about just thinking about also playing with the guy who really discovered the Beatles. When Klaus walked into that club in Hamburg and then went and got his girlfriend and brought her back, and that led to their photographic style and their hairstyle, and I don't know, man. It seemed to me like he was the first guy from out of nowhere that said, "Wait a minute, something's happening here."
Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. Did you play with Billy Preston too when he did the fest?
No, I'm sorry to say that by the time I was there, he had brought his own group with him, but I'm a super Billy fan, and he slayed me. I've actually seen him a number of times in concert for years. And it was maybe like 2 or 3 months later that he passed away from the time I saw him. But yeah, he's a god in my eyes, that guy.
Yeah, I remember. I remember when he was in LA, and yeah, it was amazing. It was great to see him, do that. Play Get Back and stuff like that.
Yeah, he what a resume, that guy. Ray Charles, Little Richard, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. Not bad, not bad.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a movie on his life.
I know there's a lot of drama in his life, actually, too. I mean, he was in and out of jail, and I mean, after he was like number one, because he had some number one hits, he wound up in prison. I mean, just like unbelievable stuff. Good idea. Let's make it. Let's make that movie.
Yeah. When you talked to Klaus, when you were playing with Klaus, did you have an opportunity to talk to him much about those Hamburg days that you were describing, and discovering them? And
no, I didn't want to be too much a fanboy, but I did hang out with him a bit, and just to kind of got to know his vibe. The one question that I remember asking him about was the artwork. And asking him, okay, Klaus, what was the difference what was the difference in the experience of creating the Revolver cover and creating the anthology covers? To which he said that, first of all, Revolver, he just kind of did it, and everybody in the band said, "Hey, I like it. You like it? Yeah, I guess I like it. Let's use it." He said, however, the anthology thing, he had to make a presentation, and he was up against, it was a bidding war of sorts, and he was up against these other artists and firms and graphic design companies and stuff, because everybody wanted that. And then he got it, but then, very interesting, if you know how the anthology cover is separate, you can separate it and you can all put it together as well. Mm-hmm. He said that he was hearing from the estates of each Beatle, the attorneys representing them, and if there were more pictures of one Beatle than another on one of the segments of the album, because it was like one big piece, then he would have a problem. So it was a puzzle for him to make sure that you had equal, likenesses on the covers in any form, that's pretty tricky stuff, so that, and to which he said that was a pain in the ass. But and then he covered it all. He wrapped it all up with, but I got paid so much more money for anthology. Sure. Whereas he said it was a couple of $100 for Revolver forever. Like he never got any extra money. They just gave him a couple of $100 and that was it.
Nice. One of the big surprises in Mark Lewison's book for me was that when the Beatles were in that brief period where Stu had left and Paul hadn't yet taken up the bass and they weren't sure what they were going to do, that Klaus had actually really seriously lobbied to join the group. That would have been something,
You bet. But then there's also the story where he was with them in the studio when they were cutting the basic track, when they were recording Hey Jude. Mm-hmm. And somebody turned to Klaus and said, "Klaus, play bass." To which Klaus said, "Nah, I can't. It's a Beatle record. I can't do that." So he and that's what he said. He said that he turned it down. So interesting.
Wow.
I wonder who asked him.
I'm going to guess Paul, but I don't know. Maybe because by then maybe John was starting to, zone out. He ended up playing bass on that song, but I'm going to guess, this is not, I guess we got to wait for the next Mark Lewison book to find out.
Yeah, it'll be
the one after that. It'll be the third.
Oh, that's right.
The third one,
the third book. Oh my God.
So we're talking about 24 or 30 years.
Yeah, I know. We may not be alive by then.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're going to need to get him to, to up the timeline on that thing, really, so that we can all get to read it.
Yeah, he's such a completist.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. Glenn, you mentioned you mentioned Beatlemania before.
Yeah.
Now that was kind of, untapped, ground in 1977 and 78. What do you remember about that whole experience?
Well, I was not the original Broadway cast.
Right.
So the show was on for about a year or two already on Broadway, and I lived in New Jersey. I was aware of the show. I was aware that it was successful, and I had a low opinion of the idea of guys trying to act like the Beatles with phony accents and all. But there was an ad in the Village Voice that they were still looking for guys to do it. And the idea of playing on Broadway, definitely, instead of the little divey bars that I was, performing at the time, playing cover songs, it was like, well, maybe the money will be good. Let me go in. I'm left-handed, So I went in, I did the audition. They liked me, and they said, well, come see the show. And then when I sat in the audience of a beautiful historic Broadway house, and watched these guys come on and do the Beatles pretty dedicatedly. It was actually it was just a lot more intense. Their attention, the attention to detail was good, and so that was an early tribute. It was kind of kicked off a lot of the tribute act world. But in any case, then I wanted to do the show because it just kind of hit me, being the age I am, growing up with that music in my past. It was just like, yeah, sure. Why wouldn't I want to be a fake Beatle? So it was a really great thing. The other thing is, I've always said I didn't go to college. I went to Beatlemania. I have my friends. I'm very close with, some of the guys that I worked with in Beatlemania, and it's like a fraternity. My band, because there were these different bands, these different bunks, and there were 3 shows going on at the time. So there were 2 bands per show. So there was a production in New York on Broadway. That's 2 bands. There was a production in Chicago. They had 2 bands. And there was a production in L.A., 2 bands. But my band, Marshall Crenshaw was my John, is, the way it goes. It sounds like he was my, I was a prostitute. But but in any case, and Marshall and I remain very good friends to this day. I've written songs with him on his records. I've toured with him, and we're just old friends, and so that part of my life, in a way, hasn't gone away.
In fact, I saw you and Marshall a couple of years ago. You played B.B. King's in New York. Yeah. And just after the New Year, and with Liberty DeVito playing drums for you.
Oh, that must have been a Beatle gig. Yeah, we that was the Incredible Simulators. We called
yes.
Yeah.
And wasn't there a third one? I'm trying to remember. Wasn't there a third guy in there, or was it just you and Marshall?
It was probably John Murjavi, who's now in the Weeklings with me, who's also in Liverpool.
In Liverpool, right?
Yeah, John is like he's like a walking encyclopedia of Beatle guitar parts and stuff. So yeah, it was probably him as well. Yeah, but I am a member of a fraternity of Beatle musicians, and it's
sure.
So that's very interesting to me. I mean, this is part of my thing, and I've subbed for I've done a number of shows subbing for members of the Fab Four, for instance.
Right.
And those guys are all friends of mine as well. And there's the band Rain. I was in that band for like years and years ago, though. For about 2 years I spent in that band. So I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that it's funny. I am, like I said, I didn't go to college. I went to Beatlemania.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you're actually not even the first member of Beatlemania to play in Liverpool, in the band
That's
Liverpool.
Right. That's
because Mitch Wiseman was in there before
That's right.
you.
That's right. Yeah.
How different are the arrangements in band to band? I mean, some of the bands try to stay very close to the Beatles versions, and some depart a bit more. But for instance, when you went to Beatlemania, did they hand you charts and say it has to be these positions and it has to be, exactly this arrangement?
Yeah, there was an attention to detail that I hadn't seen elsewhere when it came to doing covers, and I know that the story there is that when they were putting the show together, they didn't really know what they had either. Lieber and Krebs were the managers who kind of put it together. They hired some Broadway arranger guy to come in and arrange the strings and the horns and stuff like that. And initially, the backup keyboard player, Andy Dorfman, heard what this guy was doing to Beatle music, and he threw a small tantrum that the rest of the original cast went along with, and it was like, no, we want to do it right. We hold these records to be, again, from the cult. Yeah. This is the canon, the holy canon here, and we need to get as close to this as we can. So it really came from these young musician fans of the Beatles who kind of insisted that they come as close to it as possible. Now, there were inaccuracies with Beatlemania as well. So I have spent a lifetime digging out all of these details, and and certainly for all of us fans, there have been a lot of bootleg copies of the isolated soloed tracks.
Sure.
And we all, and especially the musicians, we dive into that to find out that, whoa, McCartney's not playing this bass note there, he's playing that bass note, and it's kind of solved arguments. Which, by the way, though, the arguments continue, and everybody's going to the same college on this. The Randy Bachman explanation of the opening chord of Hard Day's Night.
Right.
I was just explaining to some musicians the other night that, well, it's been refuted. There is an explanation that Randy has it wrong. So it's it is a bit like this ongoing mystery that, we're getting down to the minutia, as close as we can to the minutia, which is what the Weeklings did in the studio. We were trying to use the right gauge strings on our guitars and stuff like that. And we're all deep followers of the Recording the Beatles book. And, it's really out of control and somewhat psychologically disturbing.
Yeah. It's funny when I was a kid and playing in bands, and we would just sort of get the arrangements sort of by ear off the records, but you make a lot of mistakes and you make a lot of assumptions that are wrong, or you play what's sort of easiest to play in a certain way. And then in the 90s, when I was doing a book about the Beatles, I took out that white book. I'm sure you have it, by those 3 Japanese guys who transcribed everything. Right. And that has errors too, but a lot of it, all of the chord voicings and positions are probably close to right. And playing through that, it just, I ended up doing more playing than the writing I was supposed to be doing, because it was like, well, this feels really good. You can see why these songs work so well, So
and even that book now is, I consider that book not so good. But I didn't back then. Yeah, but they did great work. They worked hard on it, but the bar has been raised.
So someone has to do an update then.
Yeah, I guess so. You're right. Let's do that too.
Okay.
Right, we got a movie deal and a book deal. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
This is a very productive podcast.
There we go.
Glenn, just out of curiosity, I mean, you said that you don't really want to see a Beatles tribute band that tries to sound like them and dress like them and that kind of a band. But, would you prefer to see, if you were to go to see a Beatles tribute band of your choice, would you want to see one that really nails the parts and really studies it, or would you rather see something completely different? Would you rather see musicians that kind of take the Beatles in their own direction? And, how do you feel about that? Because there's so many different types of tribute bands that are out there now, and it's big business. It really is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a bit jaded, because, I've been around it a lot. I've done it myself. And a lot of times when guys like me, when we go see another Beatle band, we're looking for the mistakes. We're looking for, oh no, he's got that wrong, But that's an unrealistic format. When Paul McCartney himself goes out to play, he's not thinking about the exact way that he phrased anything. He's performing the way a true musician, a true artist should perform, So there's a bit, this cover band part of trying to capture these recordings. It's a little bit unnatural in a way, because it's not written music. And even when you want to do a Beethoven symphony, there are arguments about the right way to do it. Do you use the instrumentation the way he wrote it? Do you use the timings, the metronomic timings that Beethoven wrote on the scores, or do you do what seems to sound best for the orchestra and the audience? I mean, there's a million ways to interpret all this stuff. And at this stage in my life, I am much more impressed when I hear an incredible bluegrass version of In My Life or something. Like, to me, that tickles me. And, as a musician, that's just more interesting to me. But then it is very satisfying when somebody can emulate my favorite records in the world. It is a bit, it's busman's holiday type stuff where I'm very close to that. When I see a guy do a great Jimi Hendrix rendition that comes close to the record, that thrills me more than seeing yet another Beatles tribute act try to do every note on whatever, on some other Beatles song. I'm a bit jaded, like I said.
Well, matter of fact, just thinking in those terms, what do you think of, since 2/3 of Paul's current set is basically Beatles songs?
Yeah.
What do you think of this band that he's been playing with longer than he played with the Beatles or Wings?
I think it's his best band yet, at least for doing that stuff. But, player for player, it's a really great band. And so it's enjoyable, and it's more kind of more professional. Now, is it as innovative as Wings were, or the Beatles for that matter? Certainly not, but because it's a whole different formula that Paul's the front man. He's Elvis, he's Bruce Springsteen, or Michael Jackson up there, and he's got the supporting cast, But as far as his interpretation of his own songs, I think I got nothing but good to say about the originator doing his own music any screaming way that he wants to. And I might add something else. These tribute acts, of which I have made a living doing from time to time, everybody approaches wanting to sound like, but especially vocally. Paul McCartney is the guy that sang it, and there are just things about his voice that are irreplaceable. So when you hear him singing a song of his own, and even if he's having a hard time and he's not in good voice that night, there's the authenticity that, you just can't argue with, I think.
Did you have the same reaction, though, that some of us had when he appeared on Saturday Night Live and was, audibly having problems there on the first 8 bars of Maybe I'm Amazed, after having played the night before at, that surprise gig?
Yeah, I do know. Well, we all have studied so much about these guys. Like when I met him, I met Paul and I've met Ringo. When you meet these guys, I'm looking into his eyes, I'm talking to him, I'm shaking his hand, and I'm thinking, I've seen this guy all my life. I've seen more photos of this guy than I've seen of like people in my family. Sure. And he's never laid his eyes on me before. But I know how his mother died. And I know, and everything. I think I know now, after the Mark Lewison book, I think I know who he lost his virginity to. And it's like unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. It's very unfair that, I should know as much about this guy and he's just meeting me and being cordial,
Yeah.
But one of the things one of my opinions about him is that he doesn't really take care of his voice. And he doesn't really consider it that big a deal. So, whereas the rest of us, I've had a lifetime of struggling, keeping my voice in good shape so that I can try to hit these atmospheric notes that he just comes out with, on a record, to try to sing like someone else, it requires a little more self-discipline. And he's not really tuned in. He's not really wired like that at all. No. He just does what he does, and he's always done that way. And it reminds me of his his answer to George Martin about writing music, because Martin suggested, that he should write, that he should learn to compose, using music staff, and he's like, nah, that's going to mess me up. If I learn that, it will, screw up my process. And he does what he does, and he doesn't want to learn outside of anything. He just wants to play it by ear and work on inspiration. And that's fine, but it's undisciplined. And so the idea of him singing poorly live on global television, it's not the first time that he's kind of had that problem.
Sure.
I remember the Cavern thing that he did with Dave Gilmour probably about 20, 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was the same kind of thing. It was like, Paul, you really should have prepared for this, and I don't think he gives it a lot of thought, a lot of thought. Like I said, far be it from me, who just recorded an album of songs of his, to want to complain about the way he does things. But I think he's a little lax in the self-discipline department regarding his singing voice from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of shocking when you've also heard that he's supposed to be a perfectionist.
Well, there you go. I think that everybody has their own. We all contain our own opposites, and I think that there's probably a perfectionist side of him, definitely, and there's also a stoned out hippie side to him.
I want to ask you a very basic question here, and it's kind of a loaded question, but you've studied the Beatles your whole life, and you've played in all these bands where you know the parts, you know the bass lines. I'm sure that, as a student of the music and not just a fan, after all these years, what is it about that catalog? Is there anything in particular that impresses you more and more now as you get older, having learned it as a musician?
Well, overall, I guess a quick answer would be versatility. It's just unfathomable to me. Like everybody else in the 60s, maybe there were a couple of artists that had a little bit of a run, maybe 3 or 4 hit records, but rarely is there an act like the Beatles that just kept rewriting the book of popular music with every single. It's like every time they would put out another single or album, they would challenge themselves into recreating who they were practically, especially when you got from Paperback Writer on, where everything was just with each release. I remember waiting for these albums to come out. I remember one time seeing the list of titles of the songs in the White Album and thinking, what the hell is this going to be? Like, the continuing story of Bungalow Bill and, these ridiculous Rocky Raccoon, you're just getting over, Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper, and you're reading these titles, and they were like a completely different band by then. So overall, their versatility is astounding to this day. And as time goes by, recognizing that the music isn't really losing much credibility with younger audiences. And it's pop music made for teenagers. That's what they were intending. But, still, there's new generations that do kind of get it,
Right. We should talk about just a couple of the original songs, if we could. So who would like to ask a question?
Cool.
One of the tracks that really caught my attention was Little Teeth because it sounds so much like Twist and Shout. What was what happened there to, how did that come about? What did you go in thinking? Did you go in thinking, we're going to do Twist and Shout, or did it just kind of develop along the way, or?
Well, first of all, I love that you think that it reminds you of Twist and Shout, because how great is that record? And I always thought, I was under the impression that Little Tease was more like, I saw her standing there, but I'll take Twist and Shout as well. basically at that point we had already written some of the other rockers like Mona Lisa, but I felt we felt like we needed another rocker because those albums, those early Beatle albums that we were kind of modeling our music on, were so energetic and up tempo and like these kids that were bursting out of the scene, So it was kind of like let's write a rocker, let's really something that you stomp to, which is that was a part of their early sound, and I think it came from Hamburg as well. The stomp, a lot of their early songs had this pulse that basically it was like thump, 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 thump. So Little Tease has that, as does Mona Lisa, another one of the originals. And that was basically the exercise. Let's write a track that, kicks butt, that's as energetic as I Saw Her Standing There, or if you will, Twist and Shout. I have to tell you that one of the highest compliments I've had, people will tell me that they can't tell the difference between which songs are not written by Lennon, McCartney, or Harrison and which songs are written by Bob and myself. And, that's a high compliment. So anytime anything is compared to or mistaken for their music, how can I not be thrilled,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, for Little Tease, I hear not only I Saw Her Standing There, and the bass playing in that song is just like I Saw Her Standing There. And you also mix that with Boys.
Yes.
With all the Bop Shoo-Ups.
Absolutely.
So that's what I hear.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And Blue Suede Schubert.
I like it, man. That's good.
I see what you and Bob need to write with Neil Innes. That's what that.
I know. I know Neil, and I don't. I kind of sent him an email asking if he wanted to listen to the record and stuff, and he hasn't gotten back to me. I don't think he's really interested in yet another Beatle-y project or something. I don't know. He just. I'm guessing. I'm speculating because he hasn't gotten back to me, but. In my opinion, he came up with the best tribute to the Beatles of all time.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just kidding when I said that, by the way.
It's not hey, I'd love to. You kidding me?
One quick question. There is an original song here of yours called Oh, with an exclamation point, Darla. So obviously that's a play there on Oh Darling. I mean, the song is nothing like Oh Darling, but you even had the exclamation point. Was that done deliberately?
Well, certainly the title was. I have a daughter named Darla, who was named after Darla Hood of the Little Rascals, for that matter. But
of course.
Yeah, but and this was a song I wrote for my daughter that this predated the Weeklings album. This was a song I had laying around, but I always felt that I always felt like it was an early McCartney-ish kind of song, and the chorus I'm singing Darla, oh Darla, and then when I looked at it and I saw it in a font, I just figured, you know what? Why don't I put the explanation point there, and that adds a little nod and a wink to the Beatle fans out there, which is, I guess, really our audience. I guess the Weeklings have made a record that's kind of an inside, I don't want to say joke, but it's an inside, secret club we got with other Beatle aficionados.
Even to the point where you gave each of you Wilbury type names.
Yes, we have. We're also known as alter egos.
Right.
I'm Lefty Weekling, and Bob is Zeke Weekling, and John is Rocky Weekling, and the drummer is Ramblin' Dave Weekling. And we refer to each other as these names all the time. That's the law. And on stage, we're not allowed to call each other anything else. And it's and that's just fun too. The cover of the album is a cartoon, and I'm enjoying that too. First of all, cartoons probably look better than the way we look as 60-year-old men, but it's just there is this kind of zaniness to this project, and we recognize that as well.
In fact, that cartoon was drawn by Anthony Parisi, who is, I think, a Facebook friend of several of us.
And a great Beatle cartoonist.
Yes.
He's a really great Beatle cartoonist. That's why I reached out to him, because I've met him through these conventions and stuff. And I said, Anthony, he has that 60s style, and he certainly knows the Beatles. He's a fan. So he seemed to be a good choice, and I love the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys going to be? You guys are going to be at the fest. Have you got any plans after the fest, Glenn?
We have some shows, just live shows, mostly in the New York, New Jersey area. What's funny is that I also play in a band called The Orchestra, which contains former members of Electric Light Orchestra, and we play, and I'm the bassist / singer in that band, and we tour all over the world. It's a great gig. And that's lovely music, and very Beatlesque somewhat, and so in any case, we're playing. The orchestra is playing Abbey Road on the River, and the Weeklings were going to play there, but by the time we got it together with him, he didn't really have a good place for like a good presentation. So I was like, well, maybe some other time. But I am getting to play that for the first time. I've never been to the Abbey Road on the River thing, and I hear good things about it. So I'm looking forward to playing with the orchestra there. But and otherwise, the Weeklings, we have a lot of groundwork to do. Like we can record albums and stuff like that. But right now we have a small live following, a good one, but we have a lot of building to do if this is going to have any legs in terms of a live act.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one upcoming show that you have is at the bitter end in Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And wow, if that brick wall could talk,
I know
the people that have played in front of that. Oof.
I know, yeah. I think I got a Peter, Paul, and Mary album where they're
exactly
sitting in front of
their first album. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was recently there because there is a bartender that works there sometimes who looks exactly like Marilyn Monroe. So you guys got to check it out sometime.
Hey, absolutely.
But anyway, I was there and I was looking behind the bar and there, how they have paintings of like famous people who have played the place.
Sure.
There's Bill Cosby and Woody Allen right next to each other, and I'm looking at it. And I'm just thinking, wow, check that out.
My.
Yeah.
Glenn, who's in the orchestra besides you?
Mick Kaminsky, who was the lead violinist in Electric Light Orchestra, and Lewis Clark, who did all of the string arrangements for the band. Originally, when I first joined, Bev Bevan was the drummer, and he eventually left. And then actually, the way I joined was that Kelly Grokert, who was the original drummer. He was the original bass player. Bev Bevan was the original drummer. Kelly Grokert passed away. So it was kind of a Spinal Tap thing where they, I got the gig because one of the original members of ELO passed away. But in any case, I got the gig. And so it was one by one. It's kind of like guys are kind of falling off and dying. But it's a band that used to have like 5 former members of ELO, and now it's down to 2. But in any case, it is fun playing those songs, and there is a calling for it. Jeff Lynne doesn't play out a lot, and we've been touring all over the world. I've played in Russia 3 times now with them, in Eastern Europe and South America, and just all over the place. So that's a really fun gig.
I believe Mick Kaminsky played with somebody that I talked to a few years ago named Tina McBain. Does that name ring a bell to you? You know who she is?
Absolutely.
Yeah. She was, to anyone who doesn't know, I first heard of her when she was with a group called the Eleanor Rigby Experience, and they did two marvelous albums using Steel Eye Span sound on Beatles songs. And if that sounds weird, you have to hear the songs. They were absolutely stunning. And unfortunately, she's still gigging, I think, in England, but I don't. And she was working with Mick, I think, a couple of years ago, but they're not. I don't know that. I haven't heard from her recently, so I don't know what she's doing now. But that was pretty awesome, and I know there was an ELO connection to it because she mentioned it a couple of times.
Yeah,
So you sing all the Jeff Lynne lead vocals?
I share them with a guy named Parthenon Huxley, who's had a career as a producer and a singer-songwriter, and Eric Troyer, who is who's had a good career as a studio singer. And if you listen to "Woman" by John Lennon, you'll hear Eric prominently as the background voices. So he's been on but he's also been on like Total Eclipse of the Heart and a bunch of, Uptown Girl and a bunch of other studio stuff. He got hired a lot by Phil Ramone and on these different records. Julian, I believe he's on the first Julian album. But in any case, these guys, there's a couple of, there's three of us singers and we're passing stuff around. I'm happy to report that I get to sing Mr. Blue Sky, which to me is the ultimate ELO Beatle wannabe moment, Yeah.
It's amazing how much that song has taken on a whole new life now.
Yeah.
Because when it first came out, it was really a minor hit in America. It was more of a hit in the UK.
Yeah.
And it's been included in a lot of films, and it's a staple part. Whenever you see Jeff Lynne perform, which isn't that often, but like just now when he was on the Grammy Awards, he made sure he did that song.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's a great song, and I'm glad to see that it's been recognized more through the years.
He's of course, he's super talented, but I think that's his masterpiece, that one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot of them.
That's true.
He's made a lot of masterpieces. Yeah. I tell you one thing: the song "Tightrope," which I think is one of the greatest of all ELO songs. It's just an incredible song, and the arrangement, the way that it ends, it's a song of perfection. You could say that about a lot of his music, but that's just one that I'm mentioning that comes to mind. Anyway, we do have to wrap things up. I do want to make mention of the fact that if you want to see Glenn perform with the Weeklings, they will be at the Fest for Beatle fans, and they will be on Sunday only, correct?
Sunday afternoon.
Right. Yeah.
Sunday afternoon, and it's the weekend of March 20th through the 22nd, so they're playing on the 22nd, and it's at the Westchester Hilton in Rybrook.
Right.
And so if you can, please stop by. And Glenn, it's been great having you. Again, the CD is just called The Weeklings. It's a self-titled album.
Right.
Go out and buy it. You will love it for the original songs and for the songs that they covered from the Beatles. So, Glenn, thanks so much for joining us. We're actually going to close, with your kind permission, Glenn, with the song Little Tease. We normally don't play music here on the show, but Glenn has given us permission to play it. So we thought that for something different, instead of just saying our goodbyes, we'd close with the song. So we will say our goodbyes first. For Things We Said Today, I'm Ken Michaels, being joined by Steve Marinucci, Al Sussman, and Alan Kozin, and our special guest, Glen Burtnik. Thanks, guys, for being a part of the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
And here is Little Tease from the Weeklings. We will see you all next time.
Just so hard to please, 'cause you're such a little teaser. Pop, shoo, pop, pop, shoo, you got me in a squeeze, 'cause I'm begging on my knees. Pop, shoo, pop, shoo, I wanna take you home, girl, and get you all alone. Come along with me now, 'cause I know what you need. You're so hard to please, 'cause you're such a little teaser. such a little flirt in your skinny little skirt. I really wanna know just how far you're gonna go. You know I wanna take you home, girl, and get you all alone. Come along with me now, I know what you need. You're so hard to please, 'cause you're such a little teaser. You're so hard to please, 'cause you're such a little teaser.